Careers Explained. Today we're talking with Jimmy O'Day about his career path and current role. He received his undergraduate degree from the University of Puget Sound in chemistry and received his Ph.D. in chemistry from UC Santa Barbara. Previously, he worked as a research associate at Cornell University, a science and engineering congressional fellow, a vehicle analyst for the Union of Concerned Scientists, and was the deputy director of trucks for Calstart. He is now the Assistant Deputy Director of Transportation Electrification at CalTrans. Welcome, Dr. O'Day, and thanks for coming on today.
Great to be here.
Can you start by going back to college and describe what made you interested in getting your PhD in chemistry and what your plans at the time were career-wise?
Yeah, I was really motivated to study solutions really on the clean technology side of chemistry to address air pollution and climate change. So I grew up in Las Vegas, which is a beautiful desert and surrounded by mountains, and like many places in the West that are surrounded by mountains and have sunshine, they have a lot of air pollution problems. So the mountains and the sunlight, trap vehicle exhaust and whatnot, and the sunlight creates the photochemical conditions for ozone and smog formation. So I grew up with images of smog hanging over my hometown of Las Vegas, and was very motivated to be part of the solution to reduce that pollution. And I really loved chemistry and just saw that was my way to contribute to the problem. We need many contributors to address air pollution, but I saw my aptitude for chemistry to be one way to help in that regard.
Awesome. And then you had a variety of roles, including research, up until your current role. And can you describe kind of the biggest similarities and differences between those positions?
Yeah, I have. So after doing graduate school in chemistry, I continued down the chemistry route and studied more technologies for on the clean tech side, but increasingly got interested in really the other side of the solutions, namely the policy side, as kind of the other end of addressing these issues around air pollution and climate change. And started extracurricularly, so did volunteer stuff on climate campaigns and those sorts of efforts, and then transitioned professionally to do policy work through a fellowship specifically designed for people with science backgrounds to be policy advisors for members of Congress. So I worked for a year in DC, where you're at now, for Senator Brian Schatz from Hawaii as his science policy advisor on climate change and energy issues.
Awesome. And then in those roles, when you switched, what did you discover were the main things you did and didn't want throughout the various roles you've had up until this point?
Oh, yeah. The things that I have been consistent in all my roles for things that I want, I guess, are being fulfilled in the sense of having an impact for the work that I'm doing. And there's a lot of ways to have an impact. Like, you don't necessarily have to be, president of the United States to have an impact in the world, but just to feel that the work that I was doing was helping to move the needle, in some way. And a lot of progress is very small and incremental, but I'm always feeling like the roles and the work I was doing was to helping take those baby steps. So science is a lot of baby steps. Research world, you're just making incremental progress on these challenges in the research world, and the same can be said with policy, that it's a lot of incremental steps that ultimately add up to big changes. So feeling that having impact, I guess, is one thing I've always sought. And the other big thing, looking back, when I look at the places I've had the most fulfillment and enjoyment, have been who I've worked with, and just having really excellent colleagues that you just feel like you're on the same team and understand your strengths and your colleagues' strengths, and how you can just work together to achieve the product that you're all working on.
You knew early what you wanted and you were successful in getting in all those roles. And then moving to your current role, can you walk us through the steps of how you got into this role and what was required to get it?
Yeah, so my current role, I'm the Assistant Deputy Director for Transportation and Electrification. So electric vehicles and those, that sort of sphere at the California Department of Transportation, also known as CalTrans. Um, and how I got here, it was, I guess I would just say very incremental. Shifted from, the biggest shift was probably going from the research labs to being the policy advisor in the Senate for Senator Brian Schatz. And once I made that shift, I guess the next stage of my career, was a series of policy type positions and technical policy type roles. And ultimately it was just building up familiarity and expertise in electric vehicles and electric vehicle policy that led to the position I'm at in California. But yeah, just a natural incremental steps that got me here.
So you had the incremental steps. Were there specific prerequisites required for this role, or can anyone at any level apply?
For my role, being very familiar with California policies and the state's goals on climate change and electric vehicles are pretty important, and that's where I do have a lot of background. And yeah, policy, knowing how to navigate policy issues and kind of the thorniness of policy issues, and how to navigate them. So yeah, but probably the biggest checkbox I would say for a position like mine is having some sort of level of subject matter expertise on, in my case, California policies around electric vehicles.
That makes sense. And then once you had the expertise for the role, where did you find this? Were you on LinkedIn job posts? Was it through networking? How did you specifically kind of apply? And then what were the steps in terms of interviews, maybe to get into the role?
Yeah, so I guess the idea of working for the state of California has always been very attractive to me. We have made such great progress in California around our policies. And in my previous roles, I was on the side of really trying to push the state to adopt strong policies for electric vehicles, along with many other folks in the nonprofit world, is where I was before the state. And the next step I saw in my career was helping the state to achieve these policies that we'd been pushing them to adopt. And so, yeah, the idea of working for the state was on my radar and something that I, thought would be a very fulfilling opportunity. So when the opportunity came up at Caltrans, I jumped on it and feel very lucky to be here.
Can you give us a description of your role? What do you do? Kind of an overview of your role.
Assistant to the regional manager or something like that, right? I guess the working description of my role is I'm the point person for Caltrans on electric vehicles and transportation and electrification issues. And so I'm lucky to work with a lot of great colleagues that are supporting these efforts at Caltrans, and also to work with colleagues at other state agencies that are also doing their part to help the state meet our goals. Underneath, I guess, the purview of what I do on a daily basis, helping to get out funding programs for electric vehicle charging infrastructure. So we're in a very exciting time right now with a lot of federal funding to support these efforts from the bipartisan infrastructure law that passed about 1.5 years ago. And so states are receiving money, applying for money from these federal programs to build out charging infrastructure. So that's a big part of my role and probably takes up 85% of my time right now, but there's a lot of other exciting things maybe that we could talk about. But public charging infrastructure has been one of the biggest parts of my day since taking on this role.
And then that you said that's 80% of your day. What's the other 20% right now?
Oh gosh, a grab bag of, just whatever comes up. So, there's legislative cycles. Any bill that, California state senator or assembly person proposes that's related to electric vehicles and might impact Caltrans and, our operations. I'll get emails say, hey, what do you think about this bill? Is this something we want to support? Is it something that would affect us? So I guess the other 20% is kind of, really just a grab bag of anything related to electric vehicles that might come up. And there's a lot, because there's so much going on with electric vehicles, and a lot of excitement and activity, and companies want to talk to you because they have products that they, want to sell, and they want, the state to, fund and those sorts of things. So it's just a lot of interest around EVs right now.
So the other 20% still very electric vehicle focused policy side of it. So you might be an expert on all the up and coming legislative motions around them. And then in that 80% where you're managing programs, can you describe some examples of roles and responsibilities for that aspect
Yeah.
of your?
So one thing that we just finished this week, which we're really excited about, is we submitted a fairly large proposal to the federal U.S. Department of Transportation to fund charging stations for trucks in California. And not only just California, we partnered with Oregon and Washington on this big 3-state proposal. So this was a lot of research to go into this proposal of, identifying the needs and where the industry is at, and, making the case for why we should get this funding in California. And also describing the specifications for, if we do get this funding in California, what those charging stations would look like. Would there be 5 stalls? Would there be 10 stalls? How many trucks would they have to accommodate? Those sorts of things. So kind of the nitty gritty of site design for charging stations.
That's a great example of it. And on this type of project, let's use the truck charging stations. What does your team makeup look like, and how does that play into both the proposal, and then if you get the funding, what will the team structure look like to execute that?
Yeah, so we're really lucky that we've been collaborating on using this proposal as an example with colleagues at another state agency, the California Energy Commission, who have a lot of technical expertise that was critical to developing this application. So at CalTrans, we have a lot of expertise on the transportation system and the transportation network, namely, highway system and freight movement in the state. The Energy Commission that we've worked with in California, they have expertise in programs around charging infrastructure. So we work together and really, I don't think either one of our agencies could have developed this application alone. And so, yeah, combining efforts was really the key to success there.
Not just within your agency, but across different organizations to tackle the goal.
Yeah.
And you mentioned team structure, but also that people are one of the most important factors in your role of enjoying your colleagues. What percentage of your time is typically spent with people versus maybe doing research or policy analysis alone?
At this stage, I'm primarily in meetings all day. And as our interview started a few minutes late as I was coming from a meeting, and those sorts of things. And so, yeah, people are just are a big part of my current role. Whereas, maybe 5 or 10 years ago, I was maybe more doing research and writing the proposals myself, and really more honed in and still collaborating with folks, but spending more dedicated time doing the analyses and whatnot that go into the reports. And as I feel like you progress, you can, I guess in my role, the progression I'm on is relying more on others that have been doing the specific analyses for our work.
More of a managerial role as you move up.
Middle management is probably an accurate description of where I'm at in my career now.
And on that point, what are the opportunities for moving up from
Yeah,
there?
the state, I would say within the state, there's a lot of opportunities and just great um, leadership positions across a lot of state agencies. I could see myself staying within the state ranks for an entire career now that I'm relatively new to the state, been in the state service for about a year, but I could see myself, continuing down this path for quite a ways, just with all the opportunities and really problems we need to solve and, solutions that we need to develop to achieve our climate and air quality goals. Yeah, there's endless amount of work to do really. So yeah, on those lines, we're hiring at CalTrans, we're hiring at the state. Look at CalTrans, look at the state of California as a place to work. We have, I would say, really exciting opportunities for people coming, out of college, out of whether undergrad or master's programs, that I'll just put a plug in for specifically for California, but other state governments, and federal government would probably be similar. But in California specifically, I can say without a doubt that you would be surrounded by really experts in your field to learn from as, a young person, on the beginnings of your career path, would really help and set you down for success. And, being around people that you can learn from, I would say, is one of the biggest pieces of advice I would give to somebody, early in their career journey.
And for those who are interested in this role, what would the training look like if they're maybe newer out of college and they don't have the subject expertise that you have at this point in your career?
Yeah, the training, yeah, to kind of land one of these positions, um, we look for people that have policy experience generally, um, and know how to, interpret policy and respond to policy proposals and critically think about how a policy proposal would impact the state or the state's goals. We look for subject matter experts on zero emission electric vehicles specifically. Admittedly, it's a newer field, so there's not too many. It's not like you go to school to be an expert in electric vehicles. So that's something where you might have policy experience, or you might have transportation planning experience, that would probably be a foot in the door. And then you come work for, say like a team like ours at CalTrans, and you are around subject matter experts where you would develop specific expertise around electric vehicles.
And can you describe kind of typical day? You said meetings, a lot of it's around getting funding for electric vehicle policy, but a more kind of in-depth example of a day, maybe someday this week, what that looks like.
Yeah, someday this week, 2 days I was at a really exciting conference in Sacramento on electric vehicles, and had the opportunity to really connect with a lot of people that you haven't seen in person for a few years, and yeah, share what you're up to, and kind of plant some seeds for some future collaborations. So maybe that's an example of maybe an atypical day. I don't go to conferences every day. But those are 2 days this week. A typical day is, checking in with the folks on the electric vehicle team at CalTrans. And there's so many moving pieces right now that just being on top of all that's going on is like a big part of my role. And then checking in with our external collaborators at the other state agencies is a pretty regular thing, and making sure we're in sync and moving projects along to get them delivered, and funding out the door is kind of a big push of ours right now.
And when you talk about the different projects and the different pieces, who is assigning the goals or the topics of what you're working on or work as an agency at a given time?
Yeah, a lot of our goals, well, I would say all of our goals and all of our work is directly related to broader state goals. So, we have state goals for reducing our GHG emissions. We have state goals for the number of electric vehicles that need to be on the road. And not even just goals, we have laws and mandates that, you've probably read, headline of New York Times in California, like 100% of car sales by 2035 have to be electric. Like, so those are the types of goals that we are trying to provide the support for the state to achieve now that those requirements are actually in place. So I would say we start with, executive orders from the governor, legislation that requires these milestones to be reached, and then we take them and say, how can we at our state agency play a role in achieving them with our particular expertise?
That's super helpful. And then process-wise of how these different projects work, you get a mandate executive order of kind of a goal or requirement. You might request the funding through a proposal after doing research and planning. Once you, let's say, get the funding in this case, what are the big steps? And on average, how long do they take to implement those proposals?
So maybe like proposals for getting the funding out the door. Is that maybe what you're?
Or so using kind of the truck charger example earlier,
Yeah.
if you guys receive the funding that you requested,
Okay.
is that expected to be a 2-year project? Is that indefinite? What is the time length of these projects?
I guess the timelines associated with a project like that are, first we apply for the funding. Hopefully, fingers crossed, we get it. Then we put out a solicitation for companies to apply for this funding. Those companies will apply, will evaluate their proposals to build out the charging stations at diesel truck stops or whatever that want to convert to electric or whatnot. We choose a award winners, and then they would start the construction process, and ordering the chargers and whatnot. On truck charging in particular, it is they're fairly big projects in the sense of like the power demands that are associated with charging a truck is much higher than that to charge a car. And so there's maybe more electrical work that needs to be done on the site, more upgrades on the grid that need to be completed before you can turn the site on, so to speak. So these are multi-year projects, I guess, is a short way of saying, just because they are so involved. And part of the timeline is these are all very new projects. There's only 4 publicly accessible charging stations for trucks on the entire West Coast today. And we proposed several dozen in this particular project that we just submitted. So we're kind of embarking on relatively new territory, and there isn't, a guidebook. We're kind of writing the guidebook, and we hope that if we do get this funding, we would have a lot of lessons learned for other states to make it easier for them as they start to develop electric truck projects as well.
You're making history and you're making it greener. And
One
for
step
those,
at a time.
yeah, for those who want to embark on this journey with you, what advice would you have for someone listening who wants to follow in your footsteps and join in on this crusade?
Yeah. I would say the skills that I would recommend folks develop are being critical interpreters of information and thinking through all of the impacts of whatever project you're working on and whatever sentence you're writing, like the impacts of how that sentence could be interpreted by the owner of a truck fleet versus a community member that is impacted by truck traffic. Like being a critical interpreter of your own work, of others' work, is just such a valuable skill. And asking questions and thinking through all of the consequences of a particular policy decision maybe that just boils down to like attention to detail really matters. Like we're public servants, we want to achieve outcomes that maximize the public good, and we take that really serious, and so that means being paying close attention to detail. The other skill that I would say is just so broad and important is writing, and communication broadly. And it's a kind of cliche, but if someone is a good writer, that just goes so far in what skills you can offer a team, and ultimately providing valuable contributions to a team. And whether it's, no matter what field it is, whether it's electric vehicles or or being a doctor, like I would say that's a distinguishing feature that would set folks apart from maybe their peers, is being a good writer. So the more you can develop that skill as a young person in their career, the better. And the way you become a good writer is through practice and through, I would say, feedback from experienced writers that can help you grow and develop.
That's great. I was going to ask, how do you do that? So you already saw the question coming, as a good writer would, thinking about impact. So you really walk the talk there. Thank you so much for coming on. I have no doubt you will inspire people to join this exciting mission of changing not just California, but the world.
We're trying. Appreciate being on here.